Henneke, morning.
Good morning.
And good morning or afternoon to everybody who's joined our webinar. We're moving further on in our storyline now, still using Henneke's book, Your Phone, My Life, as the basis for our discussions. But now we're getting rather more into the nuts and bolts of being a CEO or a leader rather than what happens. So where we've started is on the topic of thinking in solutions, which might sound pretty obvious, but I think as we discuss, I think you'll find that okay, maybe there's some things here that I can think about. And where I'd like to start, Annika, I think is to discuss some of the prerequisites, because if you've got a solution, then and the implication is you've got something you're trying to solve. And I'd like to explore the sort of background to what a solution is, if I'm being clear.
Yes. I think, for the first thing that any, well, not only in business, but especially, of course, in business, you have a goal. Yeah. I want to start a company. I want to continue the company. I want to make the company profitable. There is a goal. And that goal is set almost in stone. If you decide I want to start a company and it should develop apps, then tomorrow you will not say it's a bakery. Yeah. So that goal needs to be your beacon. Yeah. That is what you are doing. And then from that goal, you will develop your strategy and your action plan and your program, etc., etc. But most importantly, once you have done that, you cascade down each time. Once you have done that and you have your program in order, then you can also start a risk register. Now, a problem is something that is like an obstacle that makes that you can't reach your goal, either on time, within budget, with enough people, etc. So if you have a problem there, then it is to find a solution that will enable you to overcome that obstacle and still fulfill your goal. And I think that is the most important thing here.
I agree, and I think the first example taken from your book in this webinar illustrates very clearly that the obstacle, the immediate objective is to pay for the share capital and get started. The overall objective is operational activity.
Yeah.
And what it demonstrates is a couple of things which we will. Sorry?
Excuse me, Kevin, the slide. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry for doing that. So the immediate objective to get operational is to pay for the to contribute to the share capital and get the share certificates. And slide, please, Nadine. This clearly demonstrates the problem that you have a desire or an objective from the government, but the processes, also controlled by the government, to enable that to happen don't exist. So this happens so often where you have different stakeholders operating from on a different timeline or operating from a different hymn sheet, which we will come on to in a future webinar. But here's the problem. I need to pay for my share capital. There is no process. And what you are describing here, Annika, is actually a pragmatic solution to an evident problem.
Yes. Very pragmatic and also, to a certain extent, fun and exciting. Yeah. So in this case, I was responsible to set up the company, logically, because of my background. I did all the business stuff. And well, I run into a problem because, with the communist countries at that time, I think we have said that in previous webinars as well, there was no communication, at least not a regular communication. And that would go to the extent that there was not a bank transfer system in place. So I explored that and I had to put the share capital requirement down, of course, otherwise we couldn't start a company. It's as simple as that. You can sign a shareholders agreement, but without the capital, you still can't start. So I ran into this problem because no one was able to transfer money from the West to Kiev in those days. And then, of course, here, my goal was still, I want this shareholders agreement signed and I want the capital in the bank. Otherwise, we can't start. And then my timeline starts to really, lapse. So the solution here was, okay, if that can't be done, then why don't I get the money in cash in the Netherlands in this case, and just put them in my shoes and walk over the border. And the reason I put them in my shoes is because there was no process, but it was conflicting with our license because we had to do it, of course. It was not only even our goal, but also our license required it. So that was the best solution, and it worked. You can see in the previous slide there was a certificate, and that certificate proving that $10,000 was indeed in the bank.
Exactly, and as you pointed out, the clock is ticking. You're on a timeline that you had agreed to, where certain things had to happen by certain dates. So delay, not an option.
No. And also against penalties very often. So the worst penalty is that you would lose your license. But there are less worse, if you will, but still very harsh penalties. Like in one country, you had to pay like $1,000 per hour or something, or $1 million per month. The penalties are quite steep, to the extent that you can lose your license.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a thread that runs through your book and indeed through your career, of course, is that you are continually faced with obstacles, as we all are, but you just knock them over. You find the way round. And as we discussed when we were preparing for this webinar, don't forget your overall objective. That's got to be at the forefront of your mind.
Yes.
And that's the lesson, actually, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
So, okay, slide, please, Nadine. And this is another example, of course. We've got two here from Switzerland, which I think are interesting. So this one, again, Switzerland, very well-regulated, very legal country. But again, what this one demonstrates, this example, I should say, demonstrates is, again, you've got conflict or conflicting objectives amongst the stakeholders. And in this case, two of the stakeholders are different sections of the government. And I think, I'd like to explain a little bit more about how come you came to this decision. But I would just like to say that the cost of implementing this is part of the decision making. So perhaps you could just explain a little bit more about your thinking process with this.
Well, in the case of Switzerland, we got the license and we were only about 6 people. So a very small crew. So very soon, in order to, again, meet the deadline, which is your goal is, of course, to establish the company and to turn it into an operational company, is set by the state at a certain date. Now, that is the state and the ministry. That's probably the Prime Minister and the Minister of Telecommunications who decide on that. But on the other hand, you have the Ministry of Labor. And Switzerland is known for not being easy on illegal workers. So if you want to enter Switzerland without a working permit, you have a problem. Now, on one hand, the state says you have to do this by this and this date. And on the other hand, it says, but you can't hire anyone from outside without a work permit. But then again, in Switzerland itself, there was only about 7 radio engineers, for example, which is really very necessary to have, as we know. It's gold dust, and it was very difficult to get them anyway. All over the world, there was a shortage for them. But also program manager and project managers that have to make sure that this whole program is rolled out. So after having a shock of, a rate at least they were trying to raid our offices, and I sent everyone to the park to play outside for a while. I decided, okay, we have to find a solution for this, because we still have these penalties, as I explained already. There were also in Switzerland high penalties. And how do we get this ball rolling without any personnel? So I decided that a few people, the ones that are very crucial to the operation, had to live at the other side of the lake in France, which had another legal system, and where most of the people who were working for us were within the EU anyway, Scandinavians, people from the UK, so they could stay in France. And of course, Switzerland was not in the UK, in the EU. So that was a very practical solution. But the risk here of not being operational on a certain date versus being penalized in the sense that people have to leave the country and you can start your program all over again, losing all that time, is costly in two ways. And the cost of paying a few hotels in France is a much less cost and diminishes your risk to a minimum. So whenever you do a risk analysis, because I already explained about the program, but the more important thing is from your program, you have to develop a risk register. And in the risk register, we used to work, especially in Switzerland, with several colors. Everything is green. That is green is easy. It turns yellow, orange, red, and purple. And purple is where you are penalized, yeah? But anything in between, and the program person is, in this case, has, of course, to keep an eye on that particular thing. And then if something turns from green into yellow, from yellow into orange, what do you do? And the thing here is, of course, always a risk analysis. From the very beginning onwards, anything you do, you need to look at it as a pyramid. And there's a very interesting book that I probably have mentioned already by Barbara Minto, a McKinsey partner, who wrote a book, The Pyramid Principle. And this pyramid principle I have used all over the world and throughout my career. And that teaches you basically how to put your priorities in place, i.e., what is critical to what you want to do in order to achieve your goal, what is less critical and what's not very critical. So you can, with the pyramid principle, you can say, okay, let's say the top 50 decisions are for the board, and these decisions either are very expensive, i.e. there's a lot of investment or a lot of cost attached to them, or they're critical in the sense of reputation, or they are critical in the sense of lacking behind, which is also a costly exercise, as I already explained. So these 50 decisions need to be measured first and foremost. Yeah. And also with the dates and the implications. And once you know that you are in the risk zone, then you have to start thinking about your help. From whom can I get help? Yeah, this can be your stakeholders, for example, your shareholders, your personnel, a lot of people who have a stake in this operation to make it work and to make it work on time and within budget are the people you can activate to help you. And so the risk register is something that I'm trying to explain always to the startups that I help, is number one. Yeah, we see when something becomes critical for our reputation, for our investment, for our date of launch, for example, and then what we do. What do we do here? Yeah, how do we try to bring this risk back to green? And I think that in this case, the cost of a couple of people in a hotel in France, it was no problem in the risk, in the whole
That's
picture
interesting.
of the risk.
Yeah, we're coming in now to the one of the other main planks, which is the risk analysis. But before moving on to that topic, I think what that experience demonstrates. I had a similar experience in Papua New Guinea. The Labour ministry turned up one day and said, "You all got to go." What? And I was actually out there as a consultant. But what had not happened, which I think is what it's similar in the case you're describing, is that the knowledge of actually what the background or the other players were up to was missing. So we had not read our license properly. So the deposit, or had not, to be more accurate, we had not understood the labour environment in Papua New Guinea, which meant we got caught out. So the need to do your risk analysis in depth at the beginning, which is what you were just coming on to, is absolutely paramount and can't be underestimated. So we'll come back to that at the moment, because we'll come back to the risk analysis in a moment, because, well, let's stick with Switzerland for a moment. And this one really interests me, because this is about, actually, it's about reputation management in the end. So again, if you'd just like to go through what happened here, what you saw as the issue or the obstacle, and how you dealt with it, which I have to say I'm pretty impressed with.
Thank you.
But let's hear it. Let's hear it from you.
All right. Well, there is a bit to read here, but of course the entire story is in the book as well. But what happened was that we had to, now I had my people and they had a work permit, right? So the first thing, of course, when you start a company is to see what it is that you have to accomplish by when. Now, in this case, as I already explained, the pyramid, one of the building stones of the plan is, how many sites do you build and where? And how do you do that? Because, to build this, a mobile operation in this case, is quite a huge enterprise. Yeah, I always compare it to building the channel, for example, but then in a year. Yeah, so the thing is that if people then, whilst you are selecting your sites and whilst you start to get your building permits and whilst there is per site so many people involved in working on this day in, day out, and then all of a sudden people, the public, i.e. the citizens of Switzerland, discover that 2 new networks are being built, and this is something which is every single time when a new generation is being implemented, like with 5G now just recently again, these people are saying, oh, I don't want this site in my backyard, it's bad for my brain, you get cancer, it's awful, it destroys my view, and on and on and on. So this was going out of control, actually. And people were chaining themselves to the sites that were not even on. Yeah, and they claimed that they got a brain tumor and the site was not even on. So you can see how important it was. And you saw also the picture just now, people were testing. We've seen this throughout the world, but it is not new, as I said. So now we have the reputation and the investment, yeah, because you know that you have 25 weeks to build the site in general, and that each site, depending on a rooftop or a mast, anyways, it's about hundreds of millions of dollars. So you have to find a solution to this problem. So one of the solutions, because we did more than one thing, of course, was that I was talking to my colleague, the chief commercial officer, and I was the chief technical officer here in Switzerland. And I said to him, Jamie, our reputation has been destroyed. It's a risk to our investment. I want to find a solution to that. Why don't we start the Orange Club? And he goes like, what is that? Well, each and every plot owner, site owner of the plot, so either the roof or the plot itself, the soil, basically is a stakeholder in the Orange network now. So why don't we try to get them on our side? Yeah? Turn it into something that they have an interest in as well. And that's not only that they are paid very well for the rent, but also that they are an Orange person and therefore can act as our ambassadors and therefore can also, convey the messages that we want to convey, because this side is not even turned on. How can it be a danger, right? For example. So he said, okay, fine. So we made a package whereby they had preferential tariffs and they got a phone and they got all the brochures and stuff. And they acted as our ambassadors. So in this case, if you build 500 sites, you have 500 ambassadors to start with. So that was one of my solutions, and it worked. We stopped, this. It was totally going out of control. So it was much less after we got the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, and it sounds simple, but actually the thought process, in hindsight, is fairly simple, but at the time it's not. And you also must have had experience, which I've had in several different countries, where you are putting up sites that are run by diesel, even if it's an emergency diesel supply. But places like Afghanistan, it was diesel. That was it, which has a very, very strong market and a value. So to keep control of the amount of diesel that was being stolen, we did a very similar thing. You basically make the local population effectively part owners of the site, and they have a pride in it. It's the same thought process or similar.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
Anyway, but again, it shows that if you make people part of the process and part of the of building a company, it's not only with, of course, with a mobile network. It's with all kinds of companies. Yeah, wherever there is something that people are afraid of, because these people were afraid. Yeah, they were afraid of, the messages, and you've seen it like last year with and the year before with COVID. COVID and 5G must have something to do with each other. I couldn't follow it, but this is just frightened people. So the thing is to take the sting out of it. Yeah. And to make them part of it, and to make them your ambassadors in the end. That is the best you can achieve, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in Papua New Guinea, we needed to put a site right up in the highlands, up in the tribal areas, and the chief executive did something slightly similar, and he was invited to an opening, or he set up an opening ceremony with the chief. And it was an all-day affair for the opening of a cell site, but secured. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think you've touched on it, and you mentioned it again when we were talking about this particular webinar about how costly your reputation is and how much of a value. And perhaps you'd like to elaborate on the thoughts that you shared with me.
Yeah, well, my everyone who works with me knows that I always say reputation is more expensive than money. Yeah, because you can do your investment and you can plan that, etc. You know where you're up to, but you never know what reputation will cost. And in many cases, the loss of reputation is so much more costly than your investment. So you have to really make sure that you understand, how you manage your stakeholders around you, and to make sure that the messaging that you are conveying, in this case our CTO, but as a CEO later on, it is very important that you always keep in mind, and it's number one, what are people saying about us? What is our reputation? Is our reputation good? Then people laugh. Yeah, and they're happily going along with you. But if your reputation turns south, then you have a real worry, because to build a business, no matter what business, is a very expensive hobby. But to rebuild it is even more expensive, because you lose trust. Everyone who starts to nag about you, is a negative source. And basically, to turn that around is a very, very difficult thing to do. So you need to be sure that not to control your environment, but to be aware of your environment and listen to it. Yeah, because sometimes people are really saying something that you should take really seriously, and think by yourself, hey, hang on a second. What is this? And what does this mean to us? Yeah, and analyze it. What is the risk here? Because again, reputation is more expensive than money.
It is, and I think there are several points that I'd just like to raise with you. First of all, in the context of this particular snippet or topic, and the first is you haven't lost focus on your objective, which is to get the network up and running by a specific date. That's still, the goal has not moved. So what you are dealing with is obstacles. I think the second thing that I observe is, and we will keep coming back to this, is that different stakeholders have different objectives. And as the CEO, you need to be on top of that. But the third one, which is now going to be a question, is you are dealing here in Switzerland, which is a wealthy country. It's in Europe. But now what you're coming across is cultural difference. And how much of, how can I word this? How do you deal with culture within the context of thinking in solutions?
Well, you of course you also have obstacles that are based on have a cultural base, I should say, right? So in certain countries where I worked, and that's not only outside the West, also in the West, particularly Switzerland, for example, females are not allowed to work in the evenings in those days, yeah, because it is a threat. Now that's a cultural thing because, okay, and it's discrimination, but it is a cultural thing because people are very scared, that something will happen to female workers. So again, you need to find a solution to that. Now, you cannot run a company without, half the population not being involved, right? 50-50. So you always have a lot of female workers, and in a situation like a telecoms operation, it's a 24/7 environment. So you need them 24/7 basically, or at least till late hours. For example, a call center. The way to go forward with the culture is to make an analysis of, is this purely cultural, and is this cultural thing also reflected in the law? And if it is reflected in the law, what can I do about it? Yeah. Can I find a solution to keep my personnel working, in this case, female personnel working, but at the same time honor the thought that is behind this? Yeah, the thought behind it is, of course, to protect women. So, and that's a good thing. So how do you solve that kind of stuff? All right. This case, Switzerland, it's the Ministry of Labor. And the Ministry of Labor is the ministry that can give you an exoneration or an exemption to the rule. And then you have to come up with a solution. So A, you need to see if it is, even for discussion, yeah, with the ministry. And B, what is then your solution to this? Because behind all of this is still the protection of women. So what we did in that case, but I did it later on in other countries as well, is to have shuttle buses to make sure that they have safe transport home, even if it's 11 o'clock or 8 or 12 o'clock at night. Not every country has this, but quite a few countries do have it. And that is a cultural thing. Yeah. So even in those cases, try to analyze with every obstacle. What is the reasoning behind that obstacle? Why are people putting obstacles on your road? There must be a reason for that. And you cannot say, oh, these stupid reasons, yeah? No, you need to analyze the reason and then say, okay, if now I know what it means, how can I come up with a solution for that? And that's basically what it is.
Yeah, well, we could spend all day talking about cultural differences, but actually, it affects everything you do in every environment, and it's never the same.
No.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide then. Now we're moving into rather more, should I say, difficult terrain.
Yeah.
And you employed me to take over your role in Kosovo, so I'm very familiar with the environment and also some of the challenges and issues that you faced. But what you faced here, could you put next slide, please, Nalin? What you faced here was a level of warfare that I did not. But this inclusion of this snippet in this webinar is not to do with war. It's actually about a solution. And again, it's keeping the network operational. So perhaps you could just expand a little bit on what you did and why.
Why? Yeah. Well, within as we discussed when we were preparing this webinar, war and any disaster all of a sudden comes out of the blue sky, and quite often out of the blue sky. So
Yeah.
what happened here was that, two little boys were basically drowned. And then an enormous mob set a fire on houses, churches, hospitals. The whole city was on fire within the shortest delay, really in hours. And this continued for like a week. So everything that was built up after the war, because it was very shortly after the war, basically went up in flames. Not everything, but lots of it went up in flames again, to the extent that the new airport, new hospitals, etc. Now, how do you go about managing in such circumstances? So in this case, what is your obstacle? Well, in this case, civil unrest, civil war. Yeah, and how do I still manage? How do I keep the communication going? So whenever something like this happens, and it happened to me several times in my life, you have to make sure that any channel of communication is at hand. And not only for you, of course, because you need to call to someone. Yeah. So for you and your team and your middle management and your stakeholders, shareholders, everyone needs to have means of communication. So one of the first things to do is to see, okay, this is my network, but what happens if my network goes up in flames or is bombed or whatever? Do I have can I go somewhere else? So you have to have also communication lines from your competitor. You have to work with the military, in this case, K4, which of course was Unifield. Yeah, they had a brilliant brand new digital Tetra system, which is basically trunking system, walkie-talkies, yeah, to say in layman's terms. And you have to make sure that whatever you do, you have to have communication channels open. So that obstacle of something that's destroyed is overcome by the fact that you have other means. And I think that was, it's a question of organization, of course, but you have to have it in place. It must be also a part of what we discussed earlier in the previous webinars, your disaster planning. Now, this is really critical. And the other thing that you then have to have in order as well is that once you are able to communicate with everyone ongoingly, is that you put wards in place so that everyone calls everyone and you know that everyone is safe. Yeah, and that is basically how we deal with these obstacles.
Okay,
and
great.
the name of the game is to keep running. A mobile, a telecoms network is of strategic importance.
Yeah.
In these situations especially. So the name of the game is keep operational at all costs.
And that reinforces the message right from the beginning of this webinar. The objective or the goal does not change.
No.
It's there.
No, certainly not. And even more important now. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because people's lives depend on it.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's yeah, well, we've all had, well, you and I both had a couple of experiences of this nature, but again, the objective is to keep operational, and everything else is possible. And Nalin, could you next slide, please? Now, this one is interesting because as well, we know that Haiti is a very poor country, but actually the obstacle that you had here was nothing to do with war or conflict. So perhaps you'd like to just run through the the obstacle and how you propose to deal with it.
Well, the obstacle in this case was that in Haiti was running a network that was based on 2.5G, if you will, yeah, those days, and on 3G. So 2.5G means that you have 1800 frequency, and 3G means that you have 2.1 gig. But this obstacle was that most people had wanted to have a GSM phone, a very small, just old-fashioned 2G phone, but we didn't have the frequency to run that. So even before I came, the company already decided to buy a small competitor. And the advantage of that was that the small competitor had a 2G network. They didn't have too many customers yet, but they had the frequency that we needed. And that, of course, is called dust. Frequency is the most important. Without a frequency, no phone. So we got now the that little network with a couple of base stations here, there, and everywhere. But it was still not providing us with a network that was, covering the whole country. And it was still the fact that a lot of people couldn't afford more expensive phones, and they had these little small phones. So what to do? Yeah. And so the board set aside a huge investment budget. But I just came, and I was there only for 2 or 3 days, and I looked at it and I thought by myself, gee, but this country is one of the poorest in the world. So if people have to change their phones just because, they now get a 900 and 1800 and 3G network, a dual mode or a triple mode, what do you do? And so I suggested, why don't we subsidize phones, new phones, so everyone can have a new phone? But for reasons which I don't want to get into, this was not accepted, but would have been a much, much, much cheaper solution to a problem, namely that you couldn't provide coverage to a lot of people simply because of the lack of the correct phone in that area. Yeah, so I think for a few hundred, no, not a few 100,000, but probably for 2 million, you would have solved that problem. Whereas now we're talking about a budget well over 100 million to invest. So my solution was not accepted
But it's very elegant.
for their own reasons, which is it's not my money, so I can't say anything about it. But I think that one thing that I would never do, and that is me, yeah, is to make an investment that is not necessary, whereas on another area in my business, I need money. So it is also what I do, but not criticizing the decision that they took, of course, but my decision would have been different because I would utilize that money for different things. Yeah? So it's a risk analysis, but it is also an analysis of how to invest wisely. And your wisely and my wisely might not be the same wisely, but my wisely would have been different. Yeah, my wisely would have been, subsidized phones.
Yeah,
Solve the problem.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to the beginning again, the objective is to continue to provide service, and actually in this case, expand the geographical coverage. And your solution, to my mind, is a very elegant solution to the problem. And I'm not going to get into this now because we'll come back to that on a different webinar, but it just demonstrates that, as we have already found in Switzerland and in the two instances, different stakeholders have different objectives, and that needs to be factored into your thinking.
Yes, so, and even though you might be right, there's more than one right, maybe. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. So I just think that's very interesting as a just an example of keep focusing on the goal, and generally the best solution will come to you. Okay, next slide, please, Nolene.
That goes to management services.
But okay, well, I'll just step out from the presentation for a moment. What for everybody who's listening, what Ineke and I have done is we have decided to reactivate our WISE management services company. And what we have been able to do through that company was provide expertise, assistance, support to people who are facing some of these issues that we're talking about. And I think what's interesting is that these issues, they appear in every country, whether they're developed nations, undeveloped nations. So we have decided that we would actually like to provide, again, that level of expertise to people who feel they would benefit from it. Okay, that's the pitch over, Inika, unless you want anything to add to that.
No, it's fine. And we have done a lot of work as WISE One, if you will.
Yes.
Especially in East Africa, Northern Africa, Middle East. So I think, geographically, this is not, it's really not important. We can be anywhere. Yeah, we are used to travel all the time. I lived in many, many, many countries and worked with many, many different cultures. And again, I think the reasoning for doing this is also that we realize that we have a sort of unique experience, and that experience we would like to share. Of course, business, yeah, but share. I don't think there's so many people who worked in so many difficult environments under so much pressure. So from that we have learned a learning curve that was very, very steep, I have to say, but we have learned a lot, and we are very much in a position to try and assist whenever people have similar obstacles to overcome.
Yeah, I think okay, can you go back to the previous slide, please, Nolene? I think to summarize, because we're getting towards the end of our allotted hour, and if anybody has got any questions, please bang them in. I mean, I've got one here from excuse me, I've lost her name now, but from Nessa, is asking, what inspired you to write the book? Which is probably a good point after we just had that little discussion.
Yes. I think what inspired me, well, first of all, many people were asking, because as I just said, the experience that we have is quite unique. Yeah, first you have to understand that today there's less than 1,000 CEOs in the world, in the mobile world. So there is a very small group of people. And from that group of people, then I was, for a long time, when I was not CEO yet, but CXO, I was probably the only woman in the world, and later on one of 5 maybe. So that experience, if I was talking to people over dinner or lunch or whatever, they were saying, "Oh, you should write a book. You should write a book. This is so interesting." But I was working like 80 hours a week, yeah, 24/7 operations, and often in very difficult circumstances, or even more than difficult circumstances. So there was no way of doing that. So what inspired me was basically, okay, we do realize, and I do realize, that it is something which is really unique. But I also realized that, as I just explained earlier, is that we have learned so fast, so many lessons, and that it would be nice to share those lessons, but in a way that is accessible to everyone. You don't need to be a telecoms expert to read this book at all. Yeah, you can read it as if it is an adventure story. And when a few colleagues of mine and we did the research on books, how many books are written actually about how the mobile industry was built. And it's the biggest game changer in the world. Yeah? Everyone now is connected. 5.5 billion people have phones, let alone machine, etc. So there was no one who's written it. And then COVID came, and I thought by myself, okay, now I've heard this so many times that people are asking me to write, I will start writing. The difficulty, of course, is that, yes, I know that I can write a bit, but is it more or less interesting enough? Yeah, does it keep the attention? So I involved a lot of people, including Kevin as well, to read their own chapter and to give me comments and to but also to talk about the memories of what we went through and, how we found solutions to problems, as this today's subject. So the book is a mixture of basically a big adventure story, the short history of how the mobile industry was built over the past decades, and also the management lessons learned from that. And those management lessons are not only thinking in solutions, but we already addressed, for example, culture. Yeah, how do you deal? At one point, I was counting in Hungary, I had 41 different nationalities working. 41. Yeah, so you have to make sure that you understand how you can work with all these people and that they do understand what it is that you are after. What is the goal here? Yeah, and you have to share that goal very, very clearly. So all these lessons were and are now in the book. And the reason that we started these webinars again is, we want to make sure that, these lessons are not forgotten and that the mobile industry, how it was built especially, gets some more attention. So apart from these webinars, I'm also participating more and more in podcasts and other things that, because in the whole world at the moment, there is a sort of realization that no one ever talked about this. And it is the biggest game changer. So why is that? Yeah. So more and more initiatives are going on, and it's very interesting.
It is. Well, thanks for that little summary. I think also both you and I have worked outside of the telecoms sphere, and I think the way that we have tried to approach this series of webinars, because your book is not a management handbook, it absolutely isn't, and it very much avoids being that. It's very clever. But what your experience has been and the way you've presented it, there are things to learn and apply in every industry. And you think about, you've only got to pick up a newspaper almost in any country today, and you read what's going on. There's a solution to that, and it's very simple. You might not want to put it in place, but it's fixable.
Almost
And that,
always, yeah. But
sorry?
it also makes a difference if you can think in you keep your goal. Your goal is your telecoms company, not a bakery, right? Let's start
Yeah.
with that one. So your goal is more or less cast in stone. Now, and you are an entrepreneur to a very large extent because it's your budget, it's your, there's a sword of Damocles always over your head. Yeah, you will lose it if it doesn't go well. So you have your goal, you're entrepreneurial, and you are a leader. And that is totally different from administration. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is nothing to do with administration. This is you are leading your people and you work together to find the solutions. And that is management. Management
Yeah.
is not administration by no means. And if it is administration, I am gone. I will not do it. It's not me. No.
Well, as you and I discussed the other day, it is interesting that for whatever reason, the primary business qualification seems to be a master in business administration, and it isn't. It really is
No.
not,
No.
which is
No.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the structured part of the webinar, Annika. Is there anything, and that what you just said about the leadership, it's not administration, is key to the understanding of your whole book, in my opinion. And I can only agree with you. And our journeys have been similar. Is there anything else within the context of today's subject, thinking and solutions? Is there anything else that you would like to add, expand on?
Yeah, maybe we were talking earlier about creativity, huh? Because a lot of solutions have to do with creative thinking, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not only you. That's also the people you work with. So how do you activate this creativity, right? Because leading is also finding creative solution, not only a solution, creative solutions. And the solution must be implementable, yeah, when it needs to be implemented. And it must be within the budget that you have already agreed on, and it must take the risk away to the largest extent possible, right? So there are a couple of these factors, I suppose, that when we were talking about this, we were discussing if creativity is something that you need to be born with, or that you can, evolve. Make sure that you every child is creative, I think, and you need to keep that creativity with you all throughout your life. I mean, I think that is a very important point. And even if you think you're not so creative to find solutions, then your creativity must consist of trying to find people around you that you can bounce your ideas on and discuss with. Yeah, and make sure that, again, make sure that whatever you do, you activate your shareholders, your stakeholders, your employees, everyone who's in your environment, and even like the Swiss example, people who are renting their plots to you, turn them in someone, these people into some, positive, a positive effect for you, and to make sure that your reputation is safeguarded.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a pretty good summary. We're well within the hour, but I think you've summarized everything so well. My opinion is we've probably come to a natural end there, Annika.
Yeah, if there's no more questions.
No, well, I'll ask again. Is there any more questions that people want to put in? We have time. We can deal with questions.
There was a question.
Yeah.
How do you handle a culture where women don't have a real voice, especially if they are managers or executives?
They don't have a voice, but they are a manager. It seems to be a bit contradictory to me.
Yeah, it does.
Meaning in the culture. So
the culture.
If you look at the different cultures that you guys were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think that this is one misunderstanding. I think that women have a voice everywhere. Yeah, and in certain countries and cultures it might be suppressed a bit, but the voice doesn't go. Yeah, and the voice doesn't need to go, because it is also, and especially in those countries, women are very creative on how to raise their voice.
Yeah.
So I think that if they are a manager, they have a voice, that's for sure. And now they have also the ability within their culture. They know much better than we do, how to raise that, how to put that point forwards, and they have lots of ways of doing that. But there is also, I have to say, a big misconception about women working in, for example, Muslim countries. I have nothing but very good experience with that. I had no problem whatsoever. And if I look at my personnel, for example, middle management in Lebanon, Lebanon is mostly a Muslim country, of course. Half of my management, and that includes technical, was female. Half of them. Everyone had the same salaries. There was no distinction in pay, better or worse or whatever. Everyone was paid same, and there was not only me who did that, even my predecessor made sure. And these women had a voice, for sure. There is no discussion. Same thing in Azerbaijan. And if I have to talk about emancipation, then I have to say that the treatment of me as a person was better in these countries than in Western Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if I could add to that as well, in the sort of more traditional countries, which I would maybe incorrectly categorize most of the Muslim countries as being more traditional, there is a level of politeness that seems to be disappearing in Western countries. And that helps make work easier, more pleasant. And talking about women specifically, in Afghanistan, we had a complete section, which was actually the call center, was entirely staffed by women with a female manager. And this was just after the Taliban had disappeared for the first time. So there was a lot of nervousness, a lot of desire to get it back into the workplace, but a lot of nervousness about it. So this, to me, is a question of creating an environment where you are actively changing. You're not changing the culture, but you are changing the experience for individual people as far as you can. And we also, I think that was where we laid on a bus, and we would drop all of the ladies off at night at the end of the day for security and safety reasons. And Papua New Guinea, which is also very traditional, they swear blind they don't eat people anymore, but it's very tribal, and it's a violent society as well. And we had a lot of middle and senior managers as well as junior staff who were female. I'm not even sure whether we might not have been 50-50, but it was just not something that we ever commented on because it was just not an important statistic.
Exactly.
Which is the objective in the end, isn't it?
I think that, yes, I think that it is, it has to do with two things, of course. In my case, I'm a role model. Yeah, I'm aware of that. So if I convey a message, that message must convey safety for women. If it is something to do with women, they are in a safe environment. There's no threat from my side, logically not. Right? But I will also defend them if that is necessary. I've never found grounds to defend them, actually, because, no one ever complained to my office, at least, And the other thing is, of course, that you don't underestimate them. Yeah, as I say, they know very well how to raise their voice, much better than I do, right? So it is a two-way road, and take that into account. But never let yourself stop raising your voice. That's number one, no matter who you are.
Absolutely. Okay. And we've come to the end of our hour. I think that's a really good end. That's a good topic to end on, in my opinion. Because it is, in the end, like thinking and solutions, it's all about changing hearts and minds, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'd just like to say thank you very much for another enjoyable webinar. And I look forward to joining you on the next one.
In September. Well, thanks for everyone. It was a joy to do this again, together with Kevin and the Nolene's team as well. So, if you want to have more information for the next webinar, it will be online very shortly. And apart from that, enjoy weekend.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Weekend is a bit early, The rest of the day is better. Okay.